Deputy District Attorney Elan Firpo, the only active prosecutor in the race for District Attorney, answers some questions about a new direction for the DA's office and her plans for protecting the citizens of Humboldt County. This educational video was compiled to give voters an understanding of her values, positions, and judgment.
I lived here in the 80s. My family moved here when my father transferred to be a highway patrolman in Garberville. I worked at Humboldt Title, and while I worked at Humboldt Title, I went to College of the Redwoods at night. I worked my way through school, and I wanted to be an engineer, so I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, where I again worked my way through school and earned an engineering degree. I moved to Santa Barbara, where I was a design engineer in the high-tech industry. And in that job, I traveled around the world designing a product in Southern California, transferring it into manufacturing in Asia, and then transferring it to the customer facilities in the East Coast and in Europe. So I traveled with the product. I've traveled around the world managing the product, managing the specifications, managing the people, managing the factories. I understand how to work a budget, how to allocate resources, and how to get the best work out of a team. When I had my children, I didn't want to travel around the world anymore. So I used that as an opportunity to decide how I wanted to spend the next part of my life, how I could make my children proud and how I could make a difference in the world around me. And I wanted to become a prosecutor. Like I said, my father's a highway patrolman, my grandfather was a retired highway patrolman, so it was pretty clear to me that I wanted to go into public service. I went to law school at night, working my way through law school, working during the day, going to law school at night, and became a prosecutor, and the only place I ever applied was Humboldt County. It was my goal to come back to Humboldt County, to bring my children to my parents, and come to work here. So now I've been in the Paul's office for 5 years as a prosecutor. During that time I went from an entry-level prosecutor to the senior prosecutor, and I did that by working very hard, nights and weekends, with a unique focus on making my work product, my personal work product, the best I possibly could. And in doing so, I proved to Paul that I had the ability to take the tougher cases, and he kept giving them to me, and I'm at the point now where I feel like I could manage the office. I have my engineering background and my management experience from engineering, as well as a strong understanding of law. I'm a very good trial attorney, and I'm ready to put that all together to be district attorney in Humboldt County. The role of district attorney is very important. People, I think, don't realize that they are choosing an attorney when they vote for district attorney. They're choosing the attorney that will represent them if they're the victims of crime, and it's the attorney that represents them as a community that looks out for their best interests. I'm the only candidate that's currently in the office. Despite the dramatic increase in workload and the lack of staffing, I've stayed at the job because it's my life's work to be a prosecutor in Humboldt County. I went to law school to become a prosecutor, and I went to law school so that I could return to Humboldt County. I plan to stay here. I'm raising my children here. They go to public school. This needs to be a safe community for my children to grow up in. My parents live in Fortuna. It needs to be a safe community for my parents in their elder years, and I am dedicated to becoming the district attorney that makes the community a safer place. I've been in the office since AB 109, so I understand the new structure for sentencing. I understand how we should proactively plan for our prosecution so that we know which people are going to be in custody and which people we're going to treat, so that we can use our resources to the best available advantage for the entire community, bringing people back from the brink of criminality, making the environment stronger and safer for the rest of us so that we can raise our families and be comfortable and safe in Humboldt County. I think the district attorney should be involved in the community, should be at public events, should be available. I would attend, for instance, Rotary functions and Elks functions and public events so that I'm accessible to the community, so that I can be transparent in my work, and so that if people have questions or concerns, I'm available to address them. Of course, I can't always talk about the facts of a case. Often I can't. And there are times when the public's interest in a case is just one of the many factors. The entire point of the district attorney's office is that we protect the community from vigilante justice. But that said, it's very important for the district attorney to be available to the community as an elected official and as a spokesperson for the justice system and what we're doing. I'm going to shut the revolving door by focusing on the small percentage of the population that's repeatedly offending by committing the same crimes over and over. For instance, it used to be that if a person committed a property crime, that they could go to prison. Now, a property crime is only eligible for local custody, so we have people that commit the same property crimes over and over and over. They're breaking into cars, they're breaking into homes, and those people, after they've racked up a certain number of cases that allege the same crime, we need to not give them a plea disposition. We need to tell them that they're pleading as charged and that they are entitled to their jury trial, which they may have, but their maximum consequence is the maximum available under the law. And we need to focus on those few people, the small percentage of the population that commits most of the crime, and keep them in custody because they've become public safety issues. And we need to prioritize the people that we keep in custody because the jail hasn't gotten any bigger. There's no more space than there used to be. So we need to work with law enforcement and probation and decide this certain group of the population needs to be kept in custody because they're a safety issue. These other people that are in custody for one reason or another that aren't a safety issue, we need to find alternatives for them, like electronic monitoring or supervised probation, so that they're out, leaving that bed space open for the people that are selling methamphetamine repeatedly, that are breaking into homes repeatedly, that are consistently committing property crimes. It's a matter of working with law enforcement to allocate that limited resource of jail to the people that are the most offensive to the rest of the population, to that small group that preys on the population. So we live in a very hopeful time in Humboldt County right now. We, for instance, have a new police chief in the city of Eureka, and we have Under Sheriff Billy Hansel, who is very well loved and respected. We have Sheriff Downey, and we have Tom Chapman in Arcata. So our head law enforcement officers are all very forward-thinking, proactive community members that want to see what's done best for the community. AB 109, while it shut down the prisons, it also allocated more resources to the counties because when they shut the prisons, they gave about 45% of the money they would have spent on the prisons back to the counties. We have the tools to work with people that are suffering from addiction so that we can help them to stop committing property crimes and to stop preying on the rest of us and to get their lives back and to get back into the community. So I would very enthusiastically look forward to working with mental health and probation and law enforcement and finding alternatives for ways to deal with people that need our help, that need to be brought back into the community, because keeping people in custody, sending people to prison was never making them better. It was just costing us a lot of money. So the fact that the state has rearranged the way we do prosecution and has rearranged the sentencing structure is not necessarily a bad thing. It gives us an opportunity, and it's a very hopeful time for the community, particularly because I see a lot of community interest in the subject. I see a lot of people that are ready to stand up and fight for their community, fight for their neighborhoods, and work with law enforcement so we can all do a better job of keeping things safe and clean in Humboldt County. So some of my more successful cases have been the Eric Schwenk case. He received 30 years in prison for child sexual abuse, and that was after jury trial. And what's interesting about that case is the first trial hung because there was a person in the jury who at the end of evidence said that she thought sexual abuse in children was an urban myth and she wouldn't convict anybody, so she was hiding in the jury panel. So we had to do that trial a second time. By the time we did it the second time, the victim was 18, and at the time of the allegation, he had been 8 years old. So it had gotten to be somewhat of a cold case by the time I had it. I was nevertheless successful at jury trial, and he was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. There's also the case of Mr. Muhammad, who committed domestic violence against a victim, and he groomed his victims. He found vulnerable victims. He found women with seizure disorders, for instance, so that they would have bruises and injuries that he could ascribe to their seizure disorder and claim were not him. I worked with this victim extensively, got her to the stand. She testified against him, and he received 25 years to life plus 8 years because it was his 7th and 8th strike conviction by the time he was found guilty of that jury trial. There was also the case of Rodney Donahue, who received 35 years for committing murder. That was a plea disposition because there were 2 other people with him at the time, and they were each blaming it on each other, but it is my firm conviction that Mr. Donahue himself committed the murder, and he did plead guilty and received 35 years in prison. There was a domestic violence case last year with a victim, Ashley Hermes, who had been brutally beaten and abused by her husband. He actually slashed her tires so that she couldn't leave before he committed the act of injuring her. She drove away on those slashed tires after he had hurt her, and came to court, and she was initially very scared and had to be worked with quite a bit to get her to be comfortable with the system. That case did not go to jury trial because she was so convincing during the evidentiary hearings at the beginning, the pretrial hearings, that Mr. Hermes, her ex, realized that he was going to lose badly at jury trial and pled to all the charges, and he received 8 years in prison. Ashley today is a new woman. She was very scared at the time of when she was victimized. She had been victimized by this person for years, and he had beaten her down and broken her spirit. But she stood up for herself as a victim of crime. She stood up in her truth. She was brave. She took the stand and she told her story. And today she is a vibrant woman who has taken control of her life and is really a role model for other victims of domestic violence. So you can see that if you stand up for yourself and you believe in yourself and the system stands up for you and serves you, you can regain your life and more. I was honored last year to earn a national award from Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They gave me the Prosecutor of the Year award for my outstanding work in the prosecution of vehicular homicides that were a result of driving under the influence. They pointed to a specific case, which was the Brooke Hims case, where she struck a minivan on Broadway and killed a mother of a family and received 12 years in prison for that case. And they looked at that and 2 or 3 other cases I did last year and found that it was a good example of how they want to see that type of case prosecuted to the full extent. And it's the first time it has ever been awarded in Humboldt County, so it was a great honor to me. Property crimes against seniors, what I've seen as a prosecutor, for the most part, is that property crimes against seniors are perpetrated on them by relatives. I see oftentimes their grandchildren or their friends of their grandchildren know that they have some resources in their home and will come and steal from them. For instance, they have money hidden in a certain place or they have a safe in the house. These young people will come in and take advantage of them. And the seniors have a tendency to not want to prosecute because one of those young people is a relative of theirs and they want what's best for them and are afraid of putting them in the system. Unfortunately, the criminal element preys upon people like that. So similar to domestic violence situations, we need to educate the seniors that have been the victims of crime that we can offer services to their relatives to help their relatives change their lifestyle so they're not part of that criminal group, while at the same time letting the seniors have a voice so that they can defend themselves. Right now they tend to be a silent minority of victims that we need to focus on. Skilled healthcare lawsuit happened because my office under Paul Gallegos decided to prosecute an organization that was in Humboldt County responsible for most of the residential treatment for elders. They were not following the guidelines of the law. They were not taking good care of their patients. And so Paul, on his own initiative, looked into prosecuting that group. It became a very large lawsuit that started in Humboldt County, but other counties joined in where skilled healthcare was also providing service. So that at the end, that victory in that lawsuit funded a DA investigator in our office, as well as a DA prosecutor in our office, as well as benefited the community of elders overall, because now skilled healthcare is held to a higher standard and is providing a better level of service in Humboldt County and at their other facilities in other counties. A plea disposition is necessary because it models where the prosecutor thinks the case would end up at jury trial. So we look at the facts, we look at the case, we look at possible problems of proof in our case, and we try to estimate where the jury would land, what they would find the person guilty of, and then where the judge would sentence that person. We then make that offer to the defendant. It's not meant to circumvent justice, it's meant to expedite justice. The person, we hope, is landing at the same place they would after a jury trial as our plea deal. It's not necessarily a bargain. It's not a benefit to the defendant to agree to it. It saves them the trouble of having to go through trial, and a lot of times it spares them the risk of getting their maximum exposure. But plea dispositions are a necessary part of what we do. They are not a fire sale. They're not a way to get out of trial. We only prosecute cases where we believe we could prove them beyond a reasonable doubt to the jury. It's a matter of deciding what's fair and just under the law and what expedites justice, and that's a plea disposition. There's a small percentage of the population that gets picked up over and over by law enforcement. There was one fellow, for instance, that was picked up 359 times last year, and that's an incredible waste of resources. It's a fairly small percentage of the population, so I would like to work with probation, with mental health, and with law enforcement to see about finding an alternative for that small percentage of the population. Rather than booking and releasing them from jail repeatedly, we need to find them housing and mental health services so that they're getting their psychotropic meds, which will keep them from using street drugs to self-medicate. If we can start by working with that small percentage of the population that's constantly picked up, then we can work on education and communication with the rest of the community that's struggling with addiction issues and living a marginal lifestyle. But as district attorney, my first objective would be to focus on that small percentage of the population that's consistently and repeatedly picked up and is costing the taxpayer an incredible amount of money. As district attorney, one of the things that's of concern to me is our outreach to the community. The victims of cases should be one of our first priorities. So I would like us proactively to reach out to victims of crime. When our office receives a new file, we should call the person that's been a victim of crime and check in with them and to let them know we're working with them, let them know when their court dates are and such. Currently, the victim witness system is in place in our office, but it's not incorporated in our office. It's in a separate place outside the building, and that's just based on logistics. There's no reason for that. We need to bring them up to the 4th floor of the courthouse, put them in the office with the attorneys, and have them on the phone so that they're available to talk to victims, they're available to talk to attorneys, and they're available to talk to the investigators. Again, it has to do with managing the group together as a team so that we're all working for the common good. And right now, if a victim wants to contact an attorney, they have to hope to catch them at their desk, which is very difficult. The attorneys are most of the time in the courtroom. If we made the victim witness personnel available for the victims would just have a higher level of service overall. Neighborhood watches are very effective, and as we've seen the number of crimes increase in Humboldt County based on realignment, we've seen more and more of the community become interested in cutting down on property crimes and people that are addicted that are wandering around in the streets. So the neighborhood watch systems are very effective, but it requires the entire neighborhood. No one person wants to be the block snitch. So when the neighborhood works together effectively as a group, they can work with law enforcement and increase the safety of their own particular neighborhood. I would like to, as district attorney, address marijuana by focusing on the criminal element that's come along with marijuana, the environmental impact, the diversion of water and resources, and the poisoning of animals. I think that we need to set aside marijuana. That's not the issue. The issue is the greed and the crime that comes along with marijuana. So as district attorney, I would focus our prosecution on the very big grows that are attracting crime, and I would like to find a way for us to work with law enforcement to acknowledge the grows that are abiding by 215 to the best of their ability, that are not damaging the environment, that are being responsible stewards of the land, so that those that are following the law within the guidelines can report when they are victims of crimes, can report when they have been victimized by criminal elements that have descended upon them, possibly because they have a marijuana grow. I think it's important that we bring that part of our community back. Right now we keep them as outliers and quasi-criminals because we don't let them know if they can fall within the law. The answer is yes. Our primary concern should be public safety and protecting the safety of all of our citizens. Marijuana itself should not be the issue. I think there will always be crime associated with marijuana. There are certain sections of the penal code that are just written for avocados, for instance, because avocados have a lot of value for fruit. And so there are places in the Central Valley where stealing avocados is a very serious crime. Marijuana will always have some crime associated with it because it's a very valuable crop. There will always be people that want to take other people's crops. So there will always be crime associated with it, but it should be the case that the person growing can feel comfortable calling on law enforcement for the protection of law enforcement against crime, violent crime, where they've been victims of crime just because they're growing marijuana. The legalization of marijuana is likely coming, whether we like it or not. The feds are going to make it legal. There are a lot of good reasons to legalize marijuana. For instance, legitimate businesses, if they're legal, they're legitimate, right now have to get planning permits, they have to go through certification processes, and we hold them accountable to a certain standard, and yet marijuana, because it's illegal, is not held to any standard. If we had legalized marijuana, we could look at how they are treating the environment when they grow. We could focus on the criminal aspects that come with the marijuana that don't necessarily have anything to do with the plant itself. Right now there's an entire criminal industry around marijuana, and marijuana itself attracts crime. It attracts people from outlying areas and counties other than Humboldt that come here to perpetrate crime against people that are growing. If marijuana was legalized and taxed and controlled, we would have a situation where we could focus on the crimes that are committed and not so much be concerned about the marijuana. So there are a lot of good reasons to legalize marijuana, and I think it's coming. We should be planning for it proactively. I've been working in my office and working with the tribes. I've found that one of their particular concerns is methamphetamine. They're being preyed upon in the valley by people that are selling methamphetamine, and it's difficult for them to deal with it on their own for a couple of issues, for a couple of reasons. For one, the people that are addicted to methamphetamine don't have any resources in order to treat their addiction. So if a person, for instance, has pled guilty to possession of methamphetamine and is receiving Proposition 36 services, which are treatment services, those services are mostly available only in Eureka. They are called upon to travel from the valley to Eureka to get those services. And the idea is to make them responsible and accountable, but if it becomes such a hardship that it makes their recovery very difficult, we aren't doing them very much good. So I would like to work with the tribes, the tribal courts, with Indian Health, and with probation to put community service, to put Proposition 36 services, to put treatment services out in the valley. Because it's been my experience that a person needs to get well at home. A person needs to get well at home in their own communities. If we're asking them to come to Eureka to try to get well, then after they've been clean for a little while, expecting them to go back to their own community, back to their old habits, it's going to be very difficult for them to stay well. So I'd like to work with the tribes so that they can become more self-sufficient in terms of helping their citizens with recovery. My plan is to manage the office by holding people accountable. People want feedback, is my perspective. They want to know when they've done something well, they want to know what their goals and objectives are, and they want to know when they've done something not so well, how they can do it better the next time. The prosecutors in my office are all keenly interested in doing a good job. They're very hardworking, and they are doing the best that they can. I would like to have a consistent prosecution protocol in my office so that when there's a crime that's committed, it's prosecuted the same way, regardless of which deputy district attorney is handling the case. There should be consistency, and I would ask that of the prosecutors and hold them accountable if that doesn't happen. As district attorney, I would have annual performance reviews for each of my employees so they know where they stand, how they are doing, what their objectives are for the next review period, how have they done in the last review period. People shouldn't be given promotions just because of the amount of time they've been in the office. They need to prove themselves, and they need to know where I want them to go. Again, as district attorney, I would like to see people specialize in certain types of cases. I would like to see more vertical prosecutors. So for instance, if there's a vertical prosecutor for marijuana, that person should become an expert in the current state of the law for marijuana prosecution, which is going to involve understanding the law across the state because it varies across the state. And Humboldt County should be leading in prosecution law. So I would hold that particular prosecutor accountable for that body of knowledge, whereas the domestic violence prosecutor would have different objectives but still be held accountable. And I would expect the domestic violence prosecutor to also become an expert in that field of law. Yeah. One of the other objectives as district attorney would be to have my deputies work with law enforcement as liaisons. So for instance, I would like to have one of our deputy district attorneys assigned to Eureka Police Department. That deputy would go to Eureka Police Department's briefings, listen to their concerns, be available to answer questions for them, and then can bring that back to the district attorney's office and tell the rest of us what's going on. Because each agency, as I've been campaigning and traveling around, I've found that each agency has very specific issues. And that would also give the deputy district attorney the opportunity to get out into the community and learn more about what's going on with the different agencies. And I've found that law enforcement and the DA's office need to work closely together. We need to realize that we're justice partners with the same objectives of public safety. And sometimes there's a mutual training element. We need to tell law enforcement how we can more effectively prosecute their cases by talking to them about what more we need from them, and vice versa. If they're doing a sting operation, if they have a particular concern, we need to know that they're focused on that so that we can prosecute those cases with more focus for them. As a managing engineer, I often managed, say, 50 engineers, but that would also include 20 technicians and a few people in the warehouse and a few people that did purchasing. You know, we had to buy the components to assemble whatever it was we were making. So an engineering group is similar to a law office in that there are different levels of people that you're dealing with. You're dealing with engineers and technicians and people in purchasing. You're dealing with attorneys, you're dealing with paralegals, and you're dealing with secretaries. It's a similar system, and you need buy-in from all those people. They need to be working as a team with the common goals and objectives. And I know as an engineer how to work with those groups so that everybody's focusing on doing the best for the group, so that the ego of the one person is not the most important thing happening. The same with the attorneys. The attorneys need to work with the support staff in our office, and all of us should be working together to corroborate and develop a good professional product to represent the people of Humboldt County. And that experience from engineering translates directly into the experience of running a law office. As the office grows, I plan to train the attorneys that come into the office. And right now when we have a training, for instance, someone will say they want to go to Irvine to learn about asset forfeiture, for example, and we'll send one prosecutor to Irvine, which is all well and good, but it's not very cost effective. The far better way is to have the professor, teacher that would do the asset forfeiture training come to Humboldt County and train the entire group at the same time. It would cost about the same to bring one person in to train the entire prosecutorial group, and the knowledge base obviously would be far more effective because everybody would share in it at the same time. Doing that sort of collaboration of management, growing a team, and allocating the workload so that people are more enthusiastic, and giving them the tools to do a better job of their job will grow the office into the professional organization it needs to be. To increase the budget in the DA's office, I would articulate a plan that I could bring to the Board of Supervisors for one thing. But additionally, I would apply for grants so that we can have vertical prosecutors in my office. So for instance, there are grants available for domestic violence. We could apply for those grants, and if they were awarded, we're usually those grants award 3/4 of a position. So for instance, if I had a domestic violence grant awarded, I could go to the Board of Supervisors and say, I have 3/4 of a domestic violence prosecutor, and then it would be their obligation to match the last quarter. And the grants are written that way so that the local community Board of Supervisors will invest in that position, so that's very important. But by having for instance, a DUI grant, a domestic violence grant, a child sexual abuse grant, a marijuana grant, we could have prosecution positions that were partially funded through grants and partially funded through the Board of Supervisors as part of our standing budget. And then when we have those positions filled, I can articulate to the Board of Supervisors the reasons we need to backfill the other positions that have been emptied, that have left us with a shortage of prosecutors in my office. And I'm confident that if I went to the Board of Supervisors with a budget that said how we're going to make the maximum use of our current resources, how we're going to work as a DA's office independently to generate some revenue, that they would be willing to match and support a budget that gave us a fully staffed prosecutor's office. Speaking for myself, I lived here in the 80s with my parents. My father retired up here as a highway patrolman, and I earned an engineering degree and moved down south. But the whole time I was down south, I really wanted to come back to Humboldt County. I like the lifestyle up here, I like the environment up here, I like the people here. So I went to law school at night so that I could return. It was always my objective to become a prosecutor and to finish my life in Humboldt County. I brought my children here. My children go to the public schools here. My parents live in Fortuna. I want them to grow up together. I want my parents and my children to know each other. And I'm sure that if I could talk to other prosecutors in big cities and talk to them about their commute, talk to them about the cost of their homes, talk to them about how clean and beautiful our environment is here, that I could recruit competent prosecutors to Humboldt County.